1227 Mongolia. Genghis Khan is dead. He conquered more territory than any human in history. 12 million square miles, from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to India. The largest contiguous empire ever built. But here's what they don't teach you. At the moment of his death, the Mongol Empire controlled 25% of the world's economic output. 1/4 of all wealth on Earth flowed through Mongol territory. And it wasn't because they burned cities and killed millions. It was because they built the most efficient economic system the medieval world had ever seen. The Mongols created the Silk Road as we know it. They invented the first international postal system. They enforced paper currency across 3 continents. They established free trade zones, standardized taxes, and protected merchants with death penalties for robbery. They turned conquest into commerce. And for 100 years, the Mongol peace, the Pax Mongolica, made them richer than Rome, richer than China, richer than any empire before them. Everyone knows Genghis Khan the warrior. Nobody talks about Genghis Khan the economist. And that's the story that matters. Because the system he built, the infrastructure he created, the trade networks he protected, they didn't just make the Mongols rich. They connected East and West for the first time in history. And the blueprint he created, controlling territory to control commerce, is the exact strategy China is using right now with the Belt and Road Initiative. If you want to understand how empires are really built, how wealth flows through infrastructure and trade, and how the same economic playbook from 800 years ago is being used today, you're in the right place. This is the Wealth Records, where we decode the systems behind the world's most powerful empires and fortunes. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and share this because what you're about to learn will change how you see both history and modern geopolitics. Temujin was born in 1162 in the steppes of Mongolia, not as Genghis Khan, not as a conqueror, as the son of a minor tribal chief who was poisoned when Temujin was 9 years old. His tribe abandoned him, his mother, and his siblings. They were left to starve on the steppes. Temujin grew up in poverty, hunting rodents to survive, sleeping in the open, living as an outcast. This wasn't the childhood of an emperor. This was the childhood of someone who understood survival at the most brutal level. And that understanding shaped everything he built. By his 20s, Temujin started gathering followers, not through bloodline or inheritance, through loyalty. He offered protection to anyone who joined him, regardless of their tribe, their family, their status. This was revolutionary. Mongol society was tribal. Your loyalty was to your blood relatives. Temujin said, loyalty is to the group that protects you. This was the first principle of his system. Meritocracy over aristocracy. The best warriors, the smartest administrators, the most skilled craftsmen, they rose to power. It didn't matter who your father was. It mattered what you could do. By 1206, Temujin had united the Mongol tribes under his rule. The tribal leaders gathered and declared him Genghis Khan, which means universal ruler. He was 44 years old, and he immediately began the conquests that would define his legacy. But here's the key. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer for land, he conquered for economic control. Every target was strategic. Northern China had wealth, technology, and craftsmen. Central Asia had the Silk Road trade routes. Persia had cities that connected east and west. Russia had fur and timber. Each conquest added economic value to the empire. And once conquered, Genghis Khan didn't rule through occupation. He ruled through administration. The first economic innovation was the Yasa, the Mongol legal code. It was simple. 10 core laws, enforced brutally, no theft, no adultery, no lying, no betrayal, and absolute protection for merchants. If you robbed a merchant on Mongol territory, you were executed. No trial, no appeal, immediate death. This made Mongol roads the safest in the world. Merchants who had been attacked by bandits for centuries could now travel from Venice to Beijing without fear. And when merchants feel safe, trade explodes. The Silk Road had existed for over 1,000 years, but it was fragmented, dangerous, and controlled by dozens of kingdoms, each taxing merchants at every border. The Mongols eliminated that. One empire, one tax system, one legal code. And suddenly, goods moved faster and cheaper than ever before. The second innovation was the postal system, called the Yam. Genghis Khan built 1,400 relay stations across the empire. Each station had fresh horses, food, and messengers. A message could travel from Beijing to the Caspian Sea in weeks. Before the Mongols, that journey took months or was impossible. This wasn't just for military communication, it was for economic coordination. Merchants could send messages ahead to arrange deals. Administrators could report tax revenue. The empire could respond to threats or opportunities faster than any competitor. Speed is power. The Mongols understood this before anyone else. The Yam system was so effective that it remained operational for 200 years, long after the Mongol Empire fragmented. Even Marco Polo used it during his travels in the 1270s. He wrote that he could travel 25 miles per day in complete safety using Mongol roads and relay stations. That speed was unheard of in medieval Europe. The third innovation was currency standardization. When the Mongols conquered northern China in the early 1200s, they encountered paper money. The Chinese had been using it for decades, but it only worked within China. The Mongols saw the brilliance. Paper money is lighter than gold or silver. It's easier to transport. It can be issued in any denomination, but it only works if people trust it. So the Mongols enforced paper currency with typical Mongol efficiency. Accept paper money or die. They made it illegal to refuse paper currency in Mongol territory. Merchants had to accept it. Taxes were paid in it, soldiers were paid in it, and because the Mongol government guaranteed its value and because the penalty for counterfeiting was death, it worked. For the first time in history, a single currency functioned across multiple continents. This was the precursor to modern fiat currency. The Mongols invented it 800 years ago. The fourth innovation was tax policy. The Mongols imposed a 10% tax on all trade goods passing through their territory. 10%. That's it. Compare that to medieval Europe, where merchants could be taxed 30 to 50%, crossing multiple kingdoms, each with its own tariffs and fees. The Mongol tax was lower, simpler, and predictable. And because it was lower, more merchants used Mongol routes. More trade meant more total tax revenue, even though the rate was lower. This is the Laffer curve before Arthur Laffer was born. Lower taxes can generate higher revenue if they increase economic activity. The Mongols proved it worked. They collected more tax revenue than the kingdoms they replaced, not by taxing more, but by facilitating more trade. The fifth innovation was religious tolerance. This wasn't moral. This was economic. The Mongols didn't care what god you worshipped as long as you paid taxes and didn't rebel. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, Zoroastrians, Jews, all were allowed to practice freely in Mongol territory. This was unheard of in medieval societies. Europe was burning heretics. The Islamic world was enforcing Sharia. China was suppressing foreign religions. The Mongols said, "Believe whatever you want." This made Mongol cities magnets for merchants, scholars, and craftsmen from every culture. Diversity wasn't a value. It was a competitive advantage. More religions meant more trade networks. A Muslim merchant in Samarkand could connect with a Christian merchant in Kiev and a Buddhist merchant in Beijing, all under Mongol protection. This created economic networks that didn't exist before. The sixth innovation was human capital extraction. When the Mongols conquered a city, they didn't just loot and leave. They identified valuable people: engineers, craftsmen, doctors, scholars, administrators. These people were spared and relocated to Mongol cities. This was forced brain drain at scale. The best Chinese engineers were moved to Samarkand to build infrastructure. The best Persian doctors were moved to Karakorum, the Mongol capital, to serve the Khan's court. The best Islamic astronomers were moved to Beijing to improve Chinese calendars. The Mongols understood that wealth isn't just gold and silver, it's knowledge and skill. By relocating the most talented people from conquered territories, they concentrated expertise in Mongol cities, making those cities centers of innovation and production. Now let's talk about how this system generated wealth. At its peak in the mid-1200s, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Every major trade route passed through Mongol territory. The Silk Road from China to the Mediterranean, the northern fur trade from Siberia, the spice routes from India, the maritime routes from Southeast Asia, all controlled by the Mongols. And they didn't just control the routes, they controlled the choke points, mountain passes, river crossings, desert oases, port cities. Any place where merchants had to stop, the Mongols collected tax. This is infrastructure monopoly. You can't avoid the toll because there's no alternative route. And because the Mongols made the routes safe, merchants were willing to pay. A 10% tax on safe passage is better than a 50% chance of being robbed and losing everything. The Mongols also controlled production centers. Samarkand produced silk and carpets. Bukhara produced metalwork and textiles. Chinese territories produced porcelain and tea. Each region specialized in what it produced best, and the Mongol system moved goods between them efficiently. This is comparative advantage on an empire scale, and the Mongols taxed every transaction. A silk merchant in Samarkand buys raw silk from China, pays Mongol tax. He weaves it into fabric, sells it to a Persian trader, pays Mongol tax. The Persian trader sells it to a European merchant, pays Mongol tax. One product, 3 tax collections. Multiply that by millions of transactions per year across the largest empire in history, and you understand how the Mongols controlled 25% of global wealth without producing much themselves. They were the middlemen, and the middleman always wins. Let's talk about the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. From roughly 1250 to 1350, the Mongol Empire provided 100 years of relative stability across Asia and Eastern Europe. Yes, the Mongols were brutal in conquest. Cities that resisted were annihilated. Populations were massacred. This was deliberate terrorism. Surrender or die. But once you surrendered, Mongol rule was predictable. Pay your taxes, follow the laws, don't rebel. And you could live in peace. This stability allowed trade to flourish at a scale never seen before. European merchants traveled to China for the first time. Marco Polo's journey in the 1270s was only possible because the Mongols controlled the entire route. Chinese goods reached European markets. Islamic science reached China. Indian mathematics spread west. This was the first era of true globalization, and it was enforced by Mongol swords and Mongol administration. Now, let's connect this to today, because the Mongol playbook is being used right now by China. The Belt and Road Initiative is the modern Silk Road. China is investing over $1 trillion in infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Ports, railroads, highways, pipelines. Why? To control trade routes, just like the Mongols. When you control the infrastructure, you control the commerce. Sri Lanka couldn't repay loans for a Chinese-built port. China took a 99-year lease. Now China controls a strategic port on one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Pakistan owes China over $60 billion for infrastructure. China now has access to Gwadar Port, giving them a military and commercial presence in the Indian Ocean. Djibouti hosts a Chinese military base, built to protect Chinese trade routes through the Red Sea and Suez Canal. This is the Mongol strategy. Control the choke points, tax the trade, build the infrastructure. And when countries can't pay, take the assets. The Mongols did it with swords. China does it with loans. But the outcome is the same: economic control of trade routes. Free trade zones are another Mongol innovation still in use. Singapore, Dubai, Hong Kong all operate as low-tax, merchant-friendly zones that attract global trade. The Mongol Empire was the first to implement this at scale. No internal tariffs, standardized rules, protection for merchants. These principles built Singapore into a global trading hub despite having no natural resources. Dubai became a Middle Eastern trade center by offering low taxes and safe passage, exactly like the Mongol cities of Samarkand and Bukhara. The model works because merchants go where trade is easiest and safest. Meritocracy is another Mongol principle used today. Genghis Khan promoted based on ability, not bloodline. Silicon Valley operates the same way. It doesn't matter where you're from. If you can code, you get hired. If you can build, you get funded. This attracts global talent, concentrates expertise, and creates competitive advantage. The Mongols understood this 800 years ago. The best administrator ran the province, regardless of ethnicity. The best general led the army, regardless of tribe. This made the Mongol military and administration more effective than any rival that promoted based on aristocracy. But the Mongol system had a fatal flaw. It required strong central authority. Genghis Khan held it together through force of personality and ruthless efficiency. After his death, his sons and grandsons divided the empire. The Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Yuan dynasty in China, each became independent. They fought each other. The trade networks fragmented. The unified tax system broke down. The roads became dangerous again. And then the Black Death hit. The plague traveled along Mongol trade routes, killing millions. The very infrastructure that made the Mongols rich also killed them. By 1368, the Yuan dynasty fell in China. By 1400, the Mongol Empire was gone, fragmented into small khanates that fought each other for another 2 centuries. Here's the lesson. Violence creates empires. Systems create wealth. Genghis Khan killed 40 million people. That number is staggering. It's 10% of the world's population at the time, but the Mongol peace that followed generated more wealth, connected more people, and advanced more knowledge than any period before it. This doesn't justify the violence. It explains the outcome. The Mongols built a system that lasted longer than the man who created it. Genghis Khan died in 1227. The Mongol economic system functioned until the 1350s. 120 years of infrastructure that changed the world. Compare this to other conquerors. Alexander the Great conquered from Greece to India. When he died, his empire immediately fragmented. No system, just personal charisma. The Roman Empire lasted centuries because they built systems: roads, aqueducts, law, administration. When emperors died, the system continued. The Mongols did the same. They built roads, postal systems, legal codes, currency standards. When Genghis Khan died, the system continued. That's the difference between a conqueror and an empire builder. Conquerors take territory. Empire builders create systems. So what's the takeaway? 3 lessons. First, infrastructure is power. Whoever controls the roads, the ports, the communication networks, controls commerce. The Mongols controlled the Silk Road. Britain controlled the seas. America controlled the internet. China is building Belt and Road. Infrastructure isn't just about moving goods. It's about controlling access. And access is leverage. Second, low taxes on high volume beat high taxes on low volume. The Mongols taxed 10% and facilitated massive trade. They made more revenue than kingdoms that taxed 50% and strangled commerce. This applies to businesses, personal finance, and national policy. Don't optimize for maximum extraction. Optimize for maximum activity. Volume beats margin when volume grows exponentially. Third, meritocracy is a competitive advantage. The Mongols promoted talent regardless of background. This made their administration and military more effective than aristocratic rivals. Companies, organizations, and nations that hire and promote based on ability outcompete those that prioritize bloodline, connections, or credentials. Talent is the ultimate scarce resource. Whoever attracts it wins. If this video showed you that the Mongols weren't just brutal warriors, but economic geniuses who built the richest empire in medieval history through trade systems, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the Wealth Records. Share this with someone who thinks history is just wars and dates, because the real story is always about systems, how they're built, how they generate wealth, how they collapse, and how the same systems keep getting reused across centuries. Genghis Khan controlled 25% of world wealth not by burning cities, but by connecting them, not by killing merchants, but by protecting them, not by hoarding gold, but by moving it. He built the first global trade system, and it made him the richest conqueror in history. Welcome to the Mongol economic empire.